To our video audience, welcome. My name is Sherwin. I'm the pastor here at Laketon Bethel. We have two services every Sunday, one at 9 and one at 11, and you are cordially invited. If you wish to discover more about Laketon Bethel, go to our website, which is laketonbethel.org. So sometimes people ask me what I'm preaching about, and sometimes I can't remember from day to day. I just don't always have it in the front of my mind. And usually it's a relative says, well, what are you going to preach about Sunday? And I always say God, or the Bible, or Jesus, or something like that. Well, today I'm we'll just say we're going to talk about the Bible, because, I'm a Bible freak anyway. But, it's still the best-selling book in the world, but it is the least read, I think. I don't think people actually ever read the thing. And those who read it don't really seem to understand it very well. Now, I became a Bible freak at kind of a young age, really in my 20s. Well, what motivated me is what still motivates me. It's what people imagine is biblical is not biblical. And what is biblical goes against so much of of the ways that we've been enculturated. It just seems like there's this huge gap between what people think the Bible says and what it actually says. So I went through all the training for it. I learned Hebrew so I could read the Old Testament in its original language. I learned Greek so I could read the New Testament in it. And a lot of these Old Testament stories, though I don't use them very often, are really quite fascinating. And today I want to talk about one, just to give you a little bit of history on this. What happened, as you all know, about Moses and the deliverance of the Israelis from Egypt, how they traveled north and how they settled in what's now the land of Israel. They're still there. And the first several hundred years after they left Egypt, they did not have a centralized government. And God told them he didn't want them to have it. They would be ruled by judges, and if a border skirmish came up, the judge just quickly raised a volunteer army to take care of it. No centralized government. So those of you of certain persuasions can say, yeah, God doesn't like big government either. But he didn't. There was no centralized government. And what happened is they were ruled by judges. Several judges, of whom Samson was the last one. And then they came up with the idea of kings, and it's all downhill from there. Now, Samson was a strong man. You all know the stories of Samson, whose strength was in his hair. That's why, guys, never get your hair cut. Because your strength is in your hair. It says so in the Bible. When I say Samson, you're all familiar with the story of Samson and Delilah. How she seduced him and cut his hair off, and so he lost his strength and the Philistines got him. Well, Delilah was not his first, and we're going to talk about that today. And we're at a time now where the Philistines have taken over, and they're ruling Israel. It happened every once in a while. The Philistines are the ancestors of the modern-day Palestinians. So you go back, story's probably 3,000 years old. You see the fight between the Palestinians and the Israelis going on that long, thousands of years. But Samson, he's running around, he's quite the stud, and he goes into Philistine territory, and he sees this woman, and he wants her. Well, women were property at that time, not considered human. They were worth a little more than a cow. And you could trade them. If you had daughters, they couldn't inherit any property, but you could sell them to their future grooms. And usually what happened was the parents would negotiate the sale. So like me with 3 daughters, I could have made pretty good money selling them out, especially if they're cute. You know how that works. And 2 sons, I'd have to divide my estate between them, but the daughters wouldn't get anything. That was just the law of the day, and that's how that went. So as this story goes from Judges 14, Samson's parents went with him into Philistine territory to negotiate the purchase of this wife. His parents didn't approve of him marrying a Philistine woman, but they went along anyway. Now, while they were there, during the negotiations, Samson goes out for a walk, and a young lion attacks him, according to the narrative. All right? And he tears this young lion apart with his bare hands. Artists have had fun with this for years, but this is actually from an old Sunday school curriculum. And this is kind of interesting. So a few days later, Samson's walking past this vineyard where he killed this lion. And inside the lion's carcass is a beehive. So Samson, now if I see a beehive, I don't mess with it. But Samson dips some honey out of the beehive, and he's eating it as he walks along. Now they're going to have a wedding party, and the wedding parties of those days lasted a week, and Samson has 30 Philistine friends coming to this party. And he told them, I will buy you each a set of new clothes, plus I'll give you some money if you can answer my riddle. And so here's the riddle that Samson gave them. Out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. What is it? And they had no clue. Couldn't figure it out for 3 days. Well, then they went to Samson's wife, whom he had just purchased, and said, find out for us. Find out for us what this means. Because she was one of them. She was a Philistine. He wouldn't tell her. It's kind of comical. It says that she went to Samson sobbing and nagging. That was on the 3rd day of the feast. By the time of the 7th day of the feast, he gave in and told her. I'm glad that people don't nag like that anymore these days. Of course, as soon as he told her, she ran to her Philistine buddies and told them. And that's how they won the bet. Now, what Samson said to them was really kind of fighting words. This is what he said from Judges 14. And if, people like to argue with me about stuff that's in the Bible, and I said, look, this has been in every Bible printed for the last several thousand years. Look at this. This is what Samson says. If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle. Hence, the title today is Plowing with My Heifer. Now, plowing with your heifer means more than just having a discussion about a riddle. If you get my drift for it, you'll figure out what plowing with my heifer means. It's a serious accusation. And Samson, the text says, was burning with anger. Just like I was the first time I read it. I had a Hebrew professor who would just give you passages out of a hat, and you had to translate them, and that was the test. Well, I got this. Can you imagine trying to translate an obscure verse like this? If you had not plowed with my heifer, that can't be right, but it was. But anyway, that's when I learned about it. And so Samson accuses them of this. He was burning with anger. So he goes back into Philistine territory, deeper into Philistine territory, kills 30 wealthy Philistines, takes their clothes, and gives those clothes to the 30 guys that he owed the clothes to. Now, while he was out doing this, and you can read this, Judges 14, it's cool stuff. While he was out doing this, they gave his wife to his best man. So he didn't have to mess with her anymore. Here, take her, she's just property anyway. Now this is what, and John, I see I have your attention here, but somebody comes at you and says, we need biblical family values. Turn to Judges 14. Works every time. All right. This is one of dozens of stories in the Old Testament that we find morally reprehensible today. Yet our own culture right here in the good old US of A, bases our own morality on many of these Old Testament virtues and values. If you look at the history of adultery in the Old Testament, it doesn't take a magnifying glass. It doesn't take a special degree. If you just read about the history of adultery, God is not against pleasure. He invented it. But what was the issue in the Old Testament was paternity. That's why the women had to be property. They had to be guarded because you didn't want to have to raise a kid that wasn't yours. And so there's very strict rules about women and adultery, not so strict for the men. But it was always a double standard there. My problem with it is, or my point today is that much of our modern morality, much of the current fights going on in churches is based on these Old Testament rules. The Reformed Church in America, our denomination, in the last year and a half has lost 40% of its members because of the LGBT, whatever those initials are, fears. United Methodist Church split right down the middle over it, going on yet today. The Episcopalians, Presbyterians, and Lutherans have all gone through this fight already. But it's because we believe that the correct morality is based on these old stories in the Old Testament. So today we're going to look at how Jesus handled adultery and how Paul handled adultery. And Jesus throws blessings instead of stones at people whose sexual behavior is different than what the popular norm is. So we get to the temple. Here we go. This is from John chapter 8. At dawn, he appeared again in the temple courts where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery." The act of adultery. Someone was plowing with the wrong heifer. How did they catch her? You ever think about that? How'd they catch her? And where was the dude? Where's the guy? Again, the law favored the man, and it was a paternity issue. She had to be put to death because if she was pregnant, how would we know who the father was? Or maybe it would embarrass some dad. So they go on with this. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say? They're using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. Just like today, when people accuse other people of deviating from sexual norms or whatever, there's always ulterior motives. They were looking for a way to diminish Jesus, and they didn't mind trashing this woman in the process. She was just a prop to them. So here's how this goes. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. I really like this paragraph. Who of you is without sin? Next week, we're going to receive new members, and we're going to have a baptism in this service. First question we ask people to become a member of Laketon Bethel: are you a sinner and in need of salvation? If you won't admit to being a sinner, you can't be a member of this church. That is a cool thing, because we're all starting from the same point. And we have no business judging someone else's behavior, ever. We have courts and laws to take care of that. And Jesus makes that pretty clear. This passage goes on. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." So the older ones left first. Us old people have a longer sin resume. We know that every day we draw breath, we sin. They knew it too. The important thing to notice here is that Jesus did not condemn this woman. Instead, he blessed her. He says, just don't do this anymore. He gave her a break. She could have been executed right there. He gave her a break, and that break is called grace. And it's a huge, huge blessing. Now, Paul talks about this in a couple of different places. One is 1 Thessalonians 5. He says this, "Therefore encourage one another and build each other up, just as in fact you are doing." Encourage even the people who deviate from your standard. Build up. Don't slander, don't gossip, don't put down. The words need to bless people because there's so much words that put people down. It's your job and my job to throw blessings instead of stones. Now, as long as I've been a pastor, I've taken kind of a libertarian approach to human behavior. And I quote this verse from 2 Corinthians quite often. You say I'm allowed to do anything, but not everything is good for you. You say I'm allowed to do anything, but not everything is beneficial. Don't be concerned for your own good, but for the good of others. What this tells me, and I've said this at synod meetings, and it just kind of falls on the floor. But here's what I think we need to do is just teach the Bible, teach what Jesus said about adultery, marriage, all those things, and then do something really, really strange. Trust people to make their own moral decisions and not hound them if they disagree with you. Personally, I am convinced that monogamy is the way to go. Diane and I just celebrated 37 years. And someone asked me what that's like, and I said, well, marriage isn't for sissies. But the thing of it is, that's my way. That's how I choose to live, and I want to live that way. But for people that aren't in tune with that, criticizing their lifestyle is not my place. And it's not the church's place. Instead of participating in stone throwing, throw blessings. You know, there's two things that you and I can give people that won't cost us a thing, and it makes all the difference in the world. Two things. First one is this: attention. We can be fully present and listen to people without judging them. You'd be surprised. I'm always surprised how much good that does. Now, 40 years ago, when I was being trained to be a counselor, I had a professor who said that when he was taking the training 30 years before that, so 70 years ago, his teachers said that if you're going to be an effective counselor, you have to start smoking a pipe. I thought, well, that's interesting. He was certainly a pipe smoker. But he said the reason for that is that you get somebody in your office, they want to talk, put that pipe in your mouth and light it so that you'll shut up and listen. I thought that's good advice. So, Prince Albert, here we come. But the thing is that listening rather than talking is good. Listen without criticism. That's the kind of attention that we need to give out. And then the second one is affirmation. Just look for the good and you find it. If people come to us And no matter what kind of a mess their lives are in, or maybe it's not a mess at all, accentuate the positive choices they're making. So much of the world can't wait to tell you how you screwed up. So much of the world can't wait to tell you you're not good enough. But Jesus makes it so that it's not true. So rather than shunning and condemning, we give attention and affirmation. The church has a nasty history of shunning people for divorce, or shunning people who live together before they get married. If you live together before you get married, you can't get married here. And I said, well, shoot, I've got a church you can get married in, because I believe getting married is a good step. So I will do your wedding. You'd be surprised how much trouble I've gotten into for making that statement. But I'm going to stick with it. And now I'm old. What are they going to do, shoot me? But the thing is that we have to stand by that. That's where it is. We can't shun people for their behavior, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I believe the church needs to trust people to make their own moral decisions and not judge them, but welcome them to the church, as we know Jesus will. So let's pray together. Lord, it's clear as a bell what you want from us with these passages. We know that you want us to accept. We know that you want us to affirm people. We know that you want us to put some of our cultural values aside and respond to what you have for us. Give us the courage to do that. Give us the brains to do that, because we're going to need help from you to make that happen. So bless us as we try. Amen. All right, to our video audience, thank you so much for listening. I was a little long-winded today, so next week you'll get a discount. It'll be a little shorter. And good to have you with us. Thanks for listening.